Today, we have a special episode of Founder Fuck Ups. We're taking a break from individual failure stories to zoom out and look at the patterns, the repeatable mistakes that kill startups time and time again. And we have the perfect guest to guide us. Admond is the founder of the Runway Ventures, a weekly newsletter that has become required reading for over 60,000 founders by dissecting the anatomy of startup failures across Southeast Asia. A physicist turned data scientist turned founder himself, Admond has a unique lens on what goes wrong. He's not just reporting on the failures, he's reverse engineering them to find the signals. Today, we're not talking about one fuck up. We're talking about the 5 most common red flags Admond sees in his research, the critical signals that a startup is on the path to failure. This is a masterclass in pattern recognition for every founder listening. Welcome to the pod.
Hey man, thanks so much for having me today. Super excited to be on today's session. I mean, these are just 5 patterns I've observed so far. I believe there could be more, right? But after writing more than 100 failed startup stories, I came to realize the patterns keeps happening again and again. Every time when I write another story, just, hey, this sounds a bit familiar and similar to what I wrote before. That's why slowly I kind of condensed that into these 5 points. But yeah, excited to share that with your viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 5 red flags we're going to go through: grow too fast, spend too much, pivot too slow, unsustainable business model, lack of governance. These are the 5. And let's start with the one that sounds like a good problem to have, like growing too fast. When does rapid growth become a red flag instead of a victory? Can you maybe give us an example from your research on the runway where a company's speed was its downfall? Time out, guys. Lots of you are watching. Lots of you are learning from the founder fuck ups that we've all gone through. But please do me one little teeny favor and subscribe so that we can keep growing the channel and get more great founders on. Back to the episode.
Yeah, I mean, this is very common, especially for, VC-backed company, but this also happens to bootstrap companies, right? But what that means is really when you first started, you want to grow fast, right? Because your investors love it, your customers love it, stuff like that. Especially for VC-backed company, what I realized is once they raise some money from investors, they have this kind of pressure from investors or board members to keep expanding, keep growing, keep hiring, keep building products, stuff like that. They move very fast, and this is what people love that, right? But at some point of time, as they grow the hockey stick graph, things start to break. For example, the costs are higher, and when they grow too fast, they keep burning their cash, their runway, thinking that once they hit that growth milestone, they can use that and raise another round. But it's a very dangerous assumption. Um, and that's why
Yeah.
there's so many VC-backed companies. They fail simply because they couldn't raise another round, not because they don't have product market fit. So
Yeah.
PNF and runway is 2 separate things, right? Most people want growth, even though they achieve PNF, but then they don't have cash to continue running. I think in Singapore, because I'm based in Singapore, right? One company that is quite interesting, it's not VC-backed, but it's a local company called 12 Cupcakes. They sell
Okay.
cupcakes. Yeah, they are pretty big cake food chain here in Singapore. So when the 2 co-founders started, they only have 2 staff selling cupcakes, for working professionals and stuff like that. Then slowly 1 outlet became like 3 outlets, and then 3 become 5, become 10, and then become 17. They started franchising, expanded overseas. They do a lot of things. And along the way, I realized after writing the stories that their payroll actually couldn't sustain the growth. They burned a lot of cash, and then they didn't follow the compliance strictly. A lot of oversight happening, and all this minor ops issue actually compounded. Eventually, they ran out of cash. They didn't pay. They had this unpaid wages with the employees, and then the employees also submitted their complaint to the Ministry of Workforce, stuff like that. It's a
Yeah.
very big thing here back then in Singapore. Eventually, after all this saga that happened, of Cupcakes, even though it was well loved by us, eventually it's shut down. They went into liquidation process simply because they just grew too fast. And this is
Yeah.
just one of the many examples that I've seen so far. Yeah.
I mean, it's a great example because there's product market fit. People are buying their cupcakes, but
Yeah.
that grow at all cost mindset of go from 1 to 3 to 5 to 10 to 20 to 70 to franchise to multinational. It's very, very costly, very different set
Mm.
of skills, lots of operational problems. Yeah, I can see it. And what are like the first signs that growth has become unhealthy? Because like you said at the beginning, you know, you're VC backed, you've got to grow, you've got to get to the next round, you've got to show a certain rate. Are there like specific metrics beyond burn rate that founders should like watch like a hawk?
Well, I think the metrics wise really depends on the kind of business that you are running, right? But I would
Mm,
say the general so-called metric is when you feel like everything is breaking at
mm,
a certain stage, you can no longer juggle the boss. Yeah, you keep growing, and then suddenly you miss a payroll, you miss a product, you miss, all this finance stuff, compliance, different things, right? Hiring and all this. I think that's probably the stage where
mm,
you have already grown too fast, and you really have to force yourself to not grow so fast
mm,
and be sustainable. I've seen a few founders, they intentionally not to grow too fast. They keep their pace small and slow so that they have all the different, I think, system and workflow in place before they started scaling. Otherwise, they just keep growing, but a lot of things just start breaking. Yeah.
yeah.
I think system is one thing. Yeah, system.
So the old tale of the tortoise versus the hare,
Yeah.
slow and steady wins the race in some cases. And obviously a lot of the reasons why these guys who've been growing so fast have burnt through their capital or haven't been able to raise the next rounds. This comes kind of red flag number two, which is spending too much, right? And that kind of
Mm.
seems obvious. Founders will often justify it in we're investing in growth, right? And that's the whole first red flag. From your analysis of failed startups, what's the most common way founders perhaps waste money? Is it hiring, marketing, or something else?
Yeah, I would say so. So spending too much is a byproduct of going too fast, right? That's why there's a hierarchy
Yeah.
of that. If they grow too fast, very likely they would spend too much because of growing, scaling, and all this. And usually, the way that I see happening before is this usually happens to VC-backed companies. It doesn't really happen to bootstrap companies because you are using your own money. When you are
Mm,
using other people's money, it's not your money, right? And then you tend to
but
spend, yeah, blow it and then spend what you don't have. And usually, when the VC money hits the bank, suddenly, and this both, a risk and also the blessing is that, especially for first-time founders who have been so frugal all the time, suddenly you receive 5 mil in your bank, and suddenly it's different. It feels very differently as a founder, especially you don't know how to handle this kind of money, and that's why when you have too, when you have don't have money, it's not good. But when you have too much money,
yeah,
it's also not good if you
yeah.
don't know how to handle that kind of money. And that's why I see so many VC-backed startups that fail because the founders couldn't handle that kind of money when they see a huge amount in their bank, and then they just use it on hiring, maybe moving to a bigger office, traveling, joining more conferences, doing all the PR show, and
Mm,
getting themselves more of like building their founders brand,
mm,
Forbes 30 under 30, all these hoo-ha thing, but instead of really spending on the business.
yeah.
Um, and I would say if there's one thing where I see they spending on, burning too much cash, I would say hiring. They
Mm,
overhire a lot. When they first started, one founder, and then suddenly they reach five, and then got some money at 10, and then from there they just keep hiring. And this happened a lot to many VC-backed companies before COVID. They
mm,
overhire, right? Maybe they got 100 people on their payroll. COVID hits. Suddenly, you lose a lot of revenue, your clients,
yeah.
and you still have to pay all your employees, 100 plus people, and you can't just fire them uh, immediately. You have to do a lot of compliance thing, check and stuff like that. So I think overhiring is probably the first place where I see a lot of startups spend too much money on.
Yeah.
And all these are fixed costs, right? So yeah, I think this is the main thing.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add to that. I mean, I don't have the same analysis as you,
Mm.
but on the hiring, I think a lot of people also then hire sort of what I call the gray hairs, the experienced people that cost
Oh yeah.
200K a year who are going to come in and change things, but they're coming from like that corporate world. And I've seen so many people waste money like that. You've covered companies that have raised kind of huge rounds, and we've already been talking about it, that have still failed.
Mm.
How, I guess, how does that massive influx of cash create a blind spot? Because it becomes reckless spending. But why do we, like in the story where suddenly you get 5 million, but previously you were frugal? Why do so many founders stop frugality, or at least smart spending? Why do they suddenly just go, holy shit, I've got so much money, I'm going to go buy this thing, I'm going to buy that thing, I'm going to invest in this thing? Why do you think that is? Is it a similar psychological thing as winning the lottery? You know how most people who win the lottery end up going bankrupt? I think there's studies on it because they just get so excited and spend all their money. Is it stuff like that?
Yeah, well, I think that could be one of the reason. Fundamentally speaking, again, this is my opinion, right?
Of course.
After all this research, I think there are fundamentally two reasons why they behave so after receiving huge sum of money. First reason is internal. This could be due to their upbringing. Whether or not you have or don't have money, when you
Mhm.
have money, it just amplifies who you are, right? Your identity. So internally speaking, if your upbringing give you a different or a poor money mindset. When you have the money, you're just gonna blow away, right? You're just gonna think, oh, it's not my money, I'm gonna blow that. I'm gonna spend this, because I struggled so long time. I should deserve better, all these
Mm.
things. So it's very internal. The second reason is external, peer pressure, environment. And one example, I'm sure you heard of this news by e-fishery, right?
Mm.
The company got into huge news because of financial scandal and double bookkeeping and fraud, right? All this. And if you look at the interview, Giban that he did with Bloomberg, I remember one line that he mentioned why he behaved that way, why he did all these things, is because when he first started, he got a huge sum of money and he tried to get advice from his peers, i.e., the high growth founders in Indonesia. And the advice that he got from his peers is you should, scale this, do that, and do this, do something more shady and stuff like that. And this is
Wow.
very dangerous because effectively, when you are high growth founders and you look up to certain founders and that kind of role models tell you to behave certain way, it's very easy to get swayed by their advice or so-called thought process. And I really think that is something wrong with not just the founders, but really the ecosystem because
Yeah.
people think this is the right way to do things when it is not. And this happens to many other founders too, not just Indonesia. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think in summary is internal and external
Yeah.
environment. Yeah.
And I can see how you get all that cash. You were mentioning like 30 under 30 Forbes, all these nonsense things that actually mean very little, unfortunately, in the reality. And then all your peers are basically saying red flag one, grow, spend money, build that team. Let's grow at all costs. We're going to hit that next step. I can see why that external pressure, ego as well. You raise money and
Right.
talking about you, that definitely plays into it. As a founder coach, I definitely know that ego plays a big part of these things. And so when you've been spending money, right? We've been growing at all costs. We're perhaps spending too much. We're trying to figure things out. And then the next red flag is that pivot, the pivot too slow. And the pivot is a celebrated move in startup culture, right? But you say pivoting too slow is that major red flag. What does a slow pivot look like? Is it about indecision, or is it about founders maybe just being a bit too attached to their original idea?
Well, I think this is huge. This happens to both startups and corporate ventures. But as we know, right, startups is all about experimenting and testing
Mm.
different hypotheses, and when it doesn't work, then you move on to the next
Yep.
hypothesis. So this okay. For early startups, this shouldn't be any problem. But usually pivoting too so happens to those companies that found early PMF. But
Mm.
when shit happens, something huge that's happening, they tend to pivot a bit slow. So one example is um Hook is a company as a corporate venture in Singapore. Um, Who is like a Netflix in Southeast Asia. It is a spin-off from one of our telcos called Singtel.
Mm.
Hook, HOOQ, right? But it's already shut down now. So what happens is when they first started, they try to become the next Netflix in Singapore and Southeast Asia. But then market shifted very fast. Netflix came to Singapore and beyond. And Netflix moved way faster than they are. And Move, when they first started, they literally copy pasted the Western movies and shows to Singapore's audience, but that
Mm.
doesn't work. Eventually, Hook realized that they need to do what Netflix does, which is create their own originals, their own
Ah.
shows, their own movies. Like
Mm.
Netflix created different originals shows, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Hook realized this very late. And by that time, they burned a lot of cash and they tried to raise more money from Singtel, their parent company. The stakeholders say no, they burn too much cash. They don't want to keep pumping the money into this little baby. And because of that, they died, right? So this is one corporate venture. Another example I can give is a company from Hong Kong. I forgot the name, but it was quite some time ago when they first started. They actually so I forgot the name. So basically, the companies rented their handphones. Sorry, not
Oh,
handphones. Their physical phones to
okay.
hotels.
Okay.
To hotels, so that whenever people in hotels, the hotel stayers, they want to order food or call someone else. Back then, didn't have handphone at all. Like there's no handphone. So
Yeah.
only physical phone. They can just stay in hotel, dial the phone, and then make all the calling and all these. And then internet becomes cheaper, handphone becomes way cheaper, and because they didn't realize that's too enough, by the time handphone and Wi-Fi became very cheap and everyone just got a handphone to do all the calling, they didn't pivot fast enough, and because of that, even though it was the first unicorn in Hong Kong, they eventually died just because they pivoted too slow, even
Yeah.
though they found early PMF.
Yeah. So first mover advantage doesn't always give you a long-term advantage, right?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, I think sometimes first, sometimes first mover advantage could be a curse
Absolutely.
because yeah, you get what I mean, right?
You
Yeah.
look at it in every industry. MySpace.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Exactly, right?
do you,
Yeah.
if you were to shape those two examples up, was that just lack of market understanding or vision, or was it indecision, do you think? In these two cases.
I think indecision is the main thing,
Yeah.
especially when you are getting certain size. You got early PMF, you got a team, you got investors, you got a board member. It's no longer just you, hey, let's move to another idea tomorrow, right? When you are just one man team, but you have a team to feed, you have investors to answer to, you have customers to answer to. The weight becomes much heavier and it's hard to switch unless you
Yeah.
are like Elon Musk, right? Screw it, I'm gonna do this.
I guess then, it's indecision, but when you get to a certain size, then it's also that internal struggle of decision making. Because, okay, if we've got investors, board members, customers, decision makers across the team, unless you are like the Elon Musk type of leader who's just like, my way or the highway, you get on
Yeah.
board or get out, right?
Yes.
Or it's going to be much harder to make those critical decisions, especially if you're a Netflix copy in Singapore, you're not a TV company. And how do you quickly pivot to creating content? Like that's complex. I'm not sure how Netflix did it, whether they bought a studio or something, but it's an
Mm.
incredible investment because, and to make that decision, then having corporate backers who are less, they're much more risk averse. I can see why it's pivoting too slow can be really, really challenging. And I think sometimes pivoting too often can be a problem.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Like there's always a balance, right? If you keep
Yeah.
changing your idea every other day, you will still
Yeah.
go nowhere. So I think self-awareness is like the key
Yeah.
that you as a founder needs to have a foresight to know when to pivot or when not to pivot. Sometimes it's a bet, sometimes it's an educated bet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Agreed. I sometimes like to refer to a founder's these bets and educated bets as you're a
yeah,
weather forecaster. I mean, I know that we're pretty good at telling the weather now with the various satellites and sophistication. But if you think back a little bit, weather was an art and a science because the weather can shift and change. And so you have to make that judgment call, that bet. You're like the shepherd on, what was it? We have a saying in the UK, red in the morning, shepherd's warning, red at night, shepherd's delight. So like if you have a beautiful sunset,
yeah.
the idea is that the next day it's going to be a lovely night, right? You're not going to have rain and misery. And I think founders do have to be those weather forecasters. And I think it's even harder for founders today because there is so much innovation and change happening. And because we're in that AI echo chamber where we're seeing it all happening constantly because we're all obsessed with it, you get this. I mean, I think it creates indecision, but you have so many little decisions to make. So pivoting starts either happening way too frequently or not at all. It's the Wild West right now.
Yeah, I mean, just have to be self-aware and strategic about each of the bets. I think,
Yeah.
especially you have all limited runway, right? And if every single time you pivot, you burn another few more months or whatever, money, time, those are important. So I think now in AI, many companies got disrupted. But good thing is because of AI, they can pivot pretty fast. But if
Yeah.
they got huge enough at certain size, it gets slightly harder, even though with AI. But it's possible. I think really move fast is really like one of the key advantage for any other company, not just
Yeah.
small, but also see.
Yeah. Having that agility, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, when startups begin, in many cases, they start up with an unsustainable model, right? And kind of to talk about red flag for unsustainable business models, when we're building and growing, we're kind of like trying to figure it out. We're going to figure it out later. We're going to figure out the unit economics, etc. At what point does this become a fatal flaw? Like, at what point do we know, do we realize that our model is fundamentally broken? And what are some of the unsustainable business models you've kind of witnessed?
Well, I've seen so many. Again, I think this usually happens to VC-backed companies because if you're a bootstrap company, you have to make your first $1 from day one. You cannot wait. Right? So this is the good thing about bootstrap business. This tends to happen for VC-backed companies. And if, again, this ties back to the past 3 points we talk about, right? You grow too fast, spend too much, pivot too slow. All this because you are trying to hit the hockey growth stick.
Yeah.
And you just put the business model aside because you think like you are like Facebook or Meta, you get
Yeah.
the user base first and then you can monetize it later. And those later might never come because you might not have even the runway to see that coming if
Mm.
you run out of cash. I just remember, okay, so just now the Hong Kong company that I talk about, they are called Pink Labs. Pink Labs, okay? So they put free smartphones in hotel rooms. So their business model back then was to charge hotel rooms for every single smartphone that they rent to them.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a bit like subscription model for hotel
Device
rooms.
rental subscription type thing.
Correct, correct. They raised 170 million in total, and then got the unicorn status, the first unicorn in Hong Kong. So they were pretty big back then. One thing is, because of one single dangerous assumption that, okay, first of all, when you bought a smartphone, back then it was not cheap, it was quite expensive. And you gotta rent it there, including all the maintenance. Even though you are renting to a hotel room, actually you were burning a lot of cash to reach that scale. So because of that, they were putting cash, even though they were everywhere in hotel rooms. And then when roaming, Wi-Fi, and eSIM they got cheaper, suddenly the whole business model didn't work. The hotel room just didn't want to use their smartphone anymore because
Yeah.
they can just, use Wi-Fi wherever, right? So their business model worked when it first started.
Yeah.
But suddenly, when the whole industry changed, it
Became
didn't work anymore. And because of pivoting too slow, they couldn't figure out the business model. So this is one of the many examples. Another example is there are many companies, for example, let's say, I don't know whether you know dark grocery, like in India
Mm.
sector, right?
Mm.
This company, especially doing B2C, the whole business only works when you reach certain economic of skills. So when you first start, you're gonna burn a shit ton of money, and
Yeah.
the unit economics just didn't make sense at all.
Yeah.
Right? You must spend $10 to acquire a user that will only give you a lifetime value of maybe $1. So you
Yeah.
lose $9 to acquire one user. But that's the only way that you can do that, given your own business model, because you can only dominate the market when you capture enough market share for the profitability to come in. And
Yeah.
this goes back to Grab as well. Even until now, Grab, the taxi, the Grab Cat, they're not profitable yet. They're trying to hit their positive EBITDA. But the point I want to make is a lot of these companies that only figure out the business model at a later part of the game, hopefully they can reach the economy of scale. While a very small part of the companies may work out, like Grab, right? But a big part of the companies may not even have the time to see the day to come. I think these kind of businesses are very dangerous
Mm.
if your assumption is false or becomes
Yeah.
false down the road of your business. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, all these red flags are fully connected to each other in a business that's kind of grown, got sustained, well, near sustainable, and then the market shifts and immediately unsustainable. And then there are, of course, are these models where you have to get, you have to have reached a big scale before you can even consider making a profit. And you have to keep growing and surviving. Like Grab made it because they were able to keep raising the rounds to keep themselves alive, right? Through that growth. It's really interesting. And so I guess a classic example of sort of what looks great on a pitch deck and in reality is a bit of a disaster are these businesses that require you to scale, right? You have to hit big scale before you make money. These are the ones that are disasters waiting to happen.
Yes, and this tends to happen to B2C company. If
Mm,
you're in B2B, then it should be fine because you can easily get your revenue, long-term sustainable business revenue from one or two single contracts. That should be
mm,
fine. B2C, yeah, you have to, if this is the model that you want, then that's the risk that you see. But I think with AI now, I think a lot of tech startups are able to monetize pretty fast without hitting the economy of scale. I think that's why this problem, I think, will become less and less moving forward because founders nowadays, they just realize they have to become profitable ASAP. They cannot wait or they don't want to take investors' money to like keep growing and then
yeah.
figure out the business model later. And yeah, I think this more maybe in future this mistake will be less and less obvious, but for now it's still there.
Yeah. And I guess the cost of building is coming down,
Yeah.
um, which obviously can make these a little bit more sustainable at the beginning, like or survivable maybe is a better word. And then our last but very much not least is lack of governance. And I guess that can kind of sound like a boring corporate problem, governance, right? But why is that one of the critical red flags, especially for an early stage startup? Like, what's the most dangerous consequence of poor governance you've seen?
E-fishery is a very good example for that, right?
Mm,
Um, I mean, I've written too many uh startups that fail because of lack of governance, fraud, bookkeeping, compliance stuff. But let's use e-fishery as the example here.
yeah,
Because of what happened to e-fishery due to lack of governance, right? It changed the entire startup ecosystem market right now. As I talk to more investors, family offices, limited partners, after what happened to e-fishery, a lot of these investors actually no longer want to deploy their capital in Southeast Asia for
mm,
two reasons. First is they lose confidence after this episode. Second reason is they don't see any meaningful exit after 5 to 10 years. So far,
yeah,
the only unicorn that we see is Grab, right? Maybe Tokopedia or some other. But in the last 10 years, actually, most of the VC funds are not returning back
yeah,
money to their LP.
yeah,
It's not like LP don't have the money, they have shit ton of money. They don't want to deploy that money to VC now
yeah,
because they don't see the return. Because of that, it creates a domino effect to the future startups that they could no longer fundraise from VC or investors because VC don't have the money.
yeah,
Second reason is founders just don't want to, take money from investors anymore because of this pressure created from the investors, right? One of the reasons why eFishery did this raise because of the very intense pressure from the board investors to grow fast and all this. Because of the pressure, the founders make the wrong steps. So a lot of factors. I think this is probably the biggest consequence of lack of governance that created in our ecosystem and is still happening now.
yeah, yeah. I mean, stories of fraud and things. I think when you're a founder, you think, well, you wouldn't do that. That's odd. But I guess there are. It's not just about fraud, right? It's also just about general governance of managing the finances in the business, having good practices. But for like a small team, like a founder listening here who maybe has 5 to 10 people, what does like good governance even look like for someone of that size? What are maybe one or two simple practices founders could implement to avoid finding themselves in an e-fishery trap?
Wait, for a team of 10,
Five to
that's
ten, like
the, okay, I think just to get, okay, if you're talking about 5 to 10 people in the team, then it's pretty straightforward. Just get your bookkeeping
In
Correct, yeah, get someone to audit that properly from time to time. If you are not raising any fund, you wouldn't have any board member to answer to. But I
Mm.
think the founder yourself, you yourself have to making sure all the financials are correct. I think I'm not a finance guy, right? But I think fundamentally just do the right things. I think okay, so you know what the right things to do if you are the
Yep.
founders without people telling you what to do like bookkeeping, getting financials in place, getting compliant, all these are the things that you probably know you should do and it's the right thing to do as a founder, right? With a 5 to 10 packs in your team. The question is, why don't you do that, right? Like
Do the right, do the
the
right.
right things. Is there's always a right time to do the right thing. Just don't wait, like because it will come back to you in a very, very bad way, especially if you screw up in a big time
Absolutely.
the lack of governance. I think usually the impact is way larger if you have many stakeholders to handle. If you're just one man show with 10 employees, your lack of governance is maybe just mistreatment of your employees. That's it.
Mm.
That's the impact. But if you have investors, you have board member, you have employees, you have customers in which their fund is parked under your company, things get very, very complicated. Um, and those impact tends to be larger. Another example is if you run a business, 5 to 10 people, suddenly you got a JV or a new business to launch, and then suddenly you commingle both funds together, you invoice from your own company to another new venture you set up. But this is the wrong thing to do, but a lot of people tend to do this, but is that the right thing to do? No, but why do you do that? So
It's not the wrong thing to do, but do it the right way. Don't be dodgy. The
yeah,
message is
yeah, yes.
don't be dodgy.
Like think and do long term and do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, this thing.
Yeah. Admond, I really appreciate you coming on the
Mm.
pod and walking us through these 5 red flags. And I've been reading Runway for maybe 2 years or so. I think when I first subscribed, and I've learned a lot from it, and I'm sure many of your readers have, and I hope my listeners do too. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, man. Appreciate it. Hope this is helpful.